Today I'm going to talk about Hannah Darboven. She was a German conceptual artist, best known for her large-scale minimalist installations, consisting of handwritten tables of numbers. She passed away in 2009, and I cannot find any video footage of interviews with her. But there's a solo exhibition of her called Writing Time in 2023. So here's a video featuring an interview with the curator, Kaylee Montana.
Welcome to Art This Week. I'm Lynn Lee, and today we're at the Menil Drawing Institute in Houston to speak to curator Kelly Montana about the exhibition Hannah Darboven, Writing Time. Thank you for being here today.
Pleasure to be here.
So to begin with, can you explain to us how you curated this show?
Yes. The exhibition Hannah Darboven, Writing Time is organized around three key moments in her art practice where line and drawing pushed her or developed a new idea that would precipitate all the work that came after that. The three parts are: one, the earliest works that she made, which are her abstract geometric drawings. The second part are her date calculations, where she turned, instead of using random number patterns, the date calculations where she turned a single date into a mathematical formula that would create a single integer, a single number that she would then draw 12 boxes. She would draw 12 wavy lines. She would turn that integer into a visual work. And then the third part is the installation that we're sitting in. So she's moving those date calculations into a large, immersive image of history and time.
Hannah Darboven was an important figure in the minimalist and conceptualist movements in the 1960s and 70s, but she is a relatively lesser known artist today. Can you tell us a little bit more about her?
Certainly. So Hannah Darboven was born in Hamburg, Germany, and moved to New York for a brief but intensely formative few years at the end of the 1960s, where she became close with now quite well-known and quite regarded artists like Sol LeWitt, Joseph Kosuth, other fellow minimal and conceptual artists that were nascent in those growing movements. And she showed work alongside them, showed work in the heady early days of those movements, but after 2 years moved back to her hometown and childhood home of Hamburg. So her interests, her pursuits within those movements just became quite singular and really started developing in parallel. So she's quite well known amongst minimal and conceptual art enthusiasts in the United States and Europe. And she became really well known in her home country of Germany. Many museums hold her art. She's quite well known amongst the general museum going public. But in this country, she didn't get as much visibility. She didn't get as much prominence despite being extremely well regarded throughout her entire practice.
I found it interesting that you describe her practice as mark making. Can you elaborate on that and how that can be considered to be a distinct form of drawing?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. Hannah Darboven was someone that had a little bit of an ambivalent relationship with drawing. She was really known as a conceptual artist, conceptual art being that the ideas drive the aesthetic form. It's not so much about what the finished product or work on the wall looks like, but it's really how did you arrive at that form. And for me, it's distinctly different than thinking about just drawing, where it's just the line or the image is maybe guiding some of that ideation, some of that image making. And so with this show, part of what I was excited about doing was looking at what Hannah Darboven teaches us about drawing and what does drawing teach us about Hannah Darboven. So in some ways, thinking about them as being separate, but also for the moments when they touch, her practice and drawing touch, and what moves her practice forward when she engages with line, when she engages with marks on the page, and when those pursuits in fact become drawing.
So in many of the works on display here, Darboven includes what we could call an index card that summarizes her series. Do you think Darboven wanted to engage reviewers so that they could understand and follow her idiosyncratic way of marking time?
It's an interesting question. I think potentially, one expression that Darboven used a lot was, "My secret is that I have none." So for her, she actually saw her work as being transparent to a certain degree. She provided viewers with her formulas, her calculations, and as you noted, those indexes that go in the beginning, that show the beginning, that show the end, and then in some ways the work just follows that line of inquiry. It follows that thinking. It just makes the work that the index card sets out for herself. So I think there's one way in which, yes, it is there for the viewer as a guide. I also think for her, they were just working tools. They were for her to see, where does this set end? Where does it begin? And then the making of the work just proceeds forth from that. There's no kind of guesswork in the meantime.
We were talking about history, and we are actually sitting in front of one of the biggest pieces that Darboven has created, inventions that have changed our world. It's a really impressive, monumental work in its scale, and also it's including more than 1,300 individually framed sheets. And this tower with individual sculptures is also part of this work. How do you think visitors should engage with this work?
This work really begins with this tower, this vitrine including these 10 sculptures. Hannah Darboven was a little bit of a collector. She loved finding interesting bits of ephemera in antique shops, out in the world, and she found this set of 10 pewter figurines that each depict an inventor. They were commissioned by the German Museum of Technology in Munich, and she was just quite taken with them and built this entire architectural installation that we're sitting in around these figures. There is a beginning and end to this series, much like the index card we were talking about earlier, that there's a calculation that begins it, that ends it, and she just makes all 1,341 works in between. So she assigns each one of these inventors to a decade of the 20th century, and then writes out all of her date calculations, calculates every single day of the 20th century alongside these inventors, which is a really curious clash of timescales. The first inventor at the top, we see the earliest one is Gutenberg. It goes all the way to the Wright brothers there at the bottom, and lots of familiar faces and names and inventions in between. But Gutenberg didn't even live in the 20th century. Some of the inventions that they talk about here, the 20th century had moved past that initial technology. So already she's creating a really strange and dynamic and kind of uncontainable sense of what these inventions meant to history, when their importance happened or when it passed, but also I think more importantly, how history is told. Does it have to be told through biography? Does it have to be told as a sense of progression? And so already you can see in that description that there's this kind of non-linear sense of time. She's moving back and forth. She's placing inventors in curious contexts. And so I think when a viewer walks into this space and might feel overwhelmed, as I initially did when coming into one of her installations. And I think that's a really natural way to feel in this space. Where do I start? Where does this end? But in fact, that's the kind of history she's telling. Where does it start? Where does it end? Does it locus around a particular figure? I don't think that's the case in here. So how a visitor should experience it is that I think to experience spatially, to experience it as architecture, to let yourself bounce between the sculptures and the walls and the rooms, to take kind of more undirected and nonlinear path through this installation.
Well, that was really informative, and thank you so much for all your answers.
No, thank you for those really wonderful questions.
Yeah.
And next, I will introduce some of her representative works. First one is the most famous work of her. Shows the basic formula that she used in almost all of her works. The Z word in the title means drawing, and what she did in this work is turning dates into a number called K-value, and put the number in boxes that matches the number. One day for a piece, and she framed these pieces and arranged them on the wall. For example, the date January 1st, 1986 can be written as 1/1/68, and the calculation is 1 plus 1 plus 6 plus 8 equals to 16. So the K value of the day is 16K. Then she put those numbers into boxes and turned the grid into lines to create a visual sense of time. The artist was not trying to present anything on a logical level. She just wanted to offer a different way to experience time and history, like spreading out a net and involves the audience into this nonlinear installation. And next one is a series called Geography 1, 2, 3. This is a large-scale installation composed of wall-mounted paper materials and freestanding graphic posters. Geography 1, 2, 3 comprises over 700 panels, each assembled from 4 sheets of A4 paper arranged vertically. In every collage, the artist incorporates signature elements of her work: wavy handwriting-like patterns, handwritten excerpts from encyclopedia entries on Earth or geography, photocopies from science textbooks, diagrams and illustrations, and black and white photographs taken in her studio or at exhibition sites. Each sheet is accompanied by a list of place names, monuments, objects, historical figures, and events, forming a comprehensive index to her encyclopedia body of work. Complementing the large-scale wall displays are 10 freestanding panels. These panels visually present various educational themes found in traditional geography and general studies courses. Maps, cross-sections, and many kinds of schematic diagram reflect the teaching content of past decades while also revealing traditional analog methods of education and knowledge transmission. I think the most interesting part is that she put her own studio and exhibition site photos in this work. She using a touch of subtle humor to pry open a small crack in the rock-hard narratives of science and education. and she also made music. Continuing her practice of visualizing dates, she once again attempted to translate these images or numbers into musical scores. She says she doesn't care about what instruments to use or how, how the rhyme sounds like. Her only interest lies in how numbers are converting into pitch. The video we just saw is one of the musical works I found online, composed by Hannah Darboven and performed on the organ by Thomas Boll. And as for why I chose to study this artist, I was fascinated by her persistent dedication to constructing a system that is independent, seemingly purposeless, and enigmatic. Her work reminds me of Marcel Broutard's the Department of Egos. Both artists employ self-constructed systems to examine existing institutional frameworks. Hannah Darboven once stated that her greatest secret was have no secret at all. Her exhibition works often included explicit calculations, yet I still perceive a strange poetry in her conception of time. It's like to weave in a net within a net. Of course, it's non-linear, and also is soft and resilient at the same time. As rigorous as computer code, yet as elusive as a loose drifting thread. Okay, well, after all this, I realized that my report doesn't yet meet the 30-minute requirement. So I just found a video that talks about her own selection and why curators decide to put those stuff in the exhibition too.
Siendo la primera exposición de Anna Darboven en España, esta exposición no es solo una exposición antológica de su trabajo. A partir de sus espacios de vida nos organizamos un punto de vista sobre ese mismo trabajo, pero ese punto de vista nos presenta no solo fragmentos de series conocidas, como por ejemplo la Odisea de Homero reescrita por la artista o su homenaje a Picasso, pero nos presenta también otras series que hasta ahora eran inéditas o semi-inéditas. Por ejemplo, sus primeros trabajos de Nueva York, que raras veces habían sido enseñados, se ven ahora aquí en esta exposición, pero también se ven series como Cosmos o Milieu, series que van a proyectar un entendimiento de un pasado, de una enciclopedia, que es un contexto para las circunstancias de una obra también. Y esa enciclopedia puede ser una enciclopedia de la cultura y de una historia de la cultura humana, pero también una enciclopedia del cotidiano, de los espacios del presente a donde el artista habita, como ocurre en Milieu. Por su vez, también esa exposición nos enseña por primera vez una serie impresionante de variaciones de un programa conceptual de construcción de estructuras que tienen expresión gráfica y expresión objetual en las estructuras de madera que nos encontramos al final de la exposición. Anna Darboven es un artista que ha protagonizado los lenguajes de un arte conceptual y de un arte minimal que han abierto nuevas posibilidades formales de expresión en la segunda mitad del siglo. Sus series numéricas, sus series de dibujos han llenado las salas de muchas exposiciones y de muchos museos, pero su serialismo es muy diferente del serialismo que encontramos en las obras de otros artistas minimales que también han utilizado progresiones numéricas, como por ejemplo Sol Lewitt. Anna Darboven va a proyectar en sus series, en sus sintagmas lineares, un conjunto de paradigmas que van a convocar la historia y la cultura dentro de la expresión formal de esas mismas series. Al mismo tiempo que Anna Darboven ha desarrollado su trabajo, Anna Darboven ha también construido y reconstruido el hogar de su familia. Quiere decir que en esta exposición nos vamos a encontrar todo un conjunto de series que se relacionan con el cotidiano de Darboven en su casa de vida y de trabajo, pero también nos vamos a encontrar precisamente esos arquipélagos de objetos que proliferan por la casa a partir de sus mesas de trabajo.
Unlike many artists, Darboven's studio was much more than just a place to work. She spent most of her life living in her family home near Hamburg, Germany, and over time she transformed the house into both a studio and a huge storage space for her selections. Inside the house, She collected thousands of objects. This included postcards, books, toys, dolls, sculptures, musical instruments, models, photographs, and many everyday objects from different countries and different time periods. At first, these selections may look random, but they were actually carefully organized. Dobroven liked to sort and arrange classified objects according to her own system. In this way, her house became more like a private museum. Selecting was not simply a hobby for her. It was an important part of her artistic practice. Instead of searching for unusual or valuable stuff, she was more interested in how ordinary objects could record history, culture, and the people's daily life. Every object became a document that represented a particular place, moment, or memory. Many of these selected objects later appeared in her artworks. She often included postcard photos, printed images, and small sculptures together with her handwritten pages. In some exhibitions, she even displayed objects from her own selection alongside her drawing and writings. Her studio also influenced by the way she thought about organizing information. Just as she carefully collected and arranged stuff in her house, she also did this to dates and numbers. Because her studio was so important, several museums and exhibitions have recreated part of it for the public. Curators believe that it was impossible to fully understand her work without seeing the environment where she lived and selected stuff. Her studio itself became a reflection of her artistic ideals. I think this is one of the most interesting aspects of Hannah Darboven's practice. She didn't separate everyday life from her art. Collection, organizing, writing, and creating were all connected. Her house was not just a workplace, it was a living archive that continued to grow throughout her life, and it became an artwork in its own right. Looking at her studio helps us to understand what her working was not only about numbers or dates, it was also about preserving memories, organizing knowledge, and finding different ways to record the world around us. And that's my report. Thank you for listening.